The Zen Monkey and the Lotus Flower. And it's 52 little short stories. Each one's like a little Zen wisdom bomb. It's giving me like, choose your own adventure, but for like your soul.
I love that. And you're so right. It's like a little sampler platter of Zen philosophy. But what's so fascinating is that these like simple stories on the surface are actually tapping into some really deep stuff like mindfulness, growth, resilience, that feeling of interconnectedness. It's all in there.
Yeah. And you know me, I am a sucker for a good story, especially if it makes me think. So let's unpack some of these Zen tales, the ones that really like pack a punch.
Sounds good to me. We'll dig into the deeper meaning behind them, and we can even see how it connects to your own life. You know, those everyday challenges and those tough decisions you got to make, and maybe even how you view the world. Ready to dive in.
Absolutely. And it seems fitting to start with the first story, the Zen Monkey. He's just all over the place, chasing every shiny object, can't sit still. Yeah. Some days, honestly, that monkey's my spirit animal.
Well, it's a classic representation of the monkey mind in Zen. That's that constant chatter that we all experience. But the story's not about magically stopping those thoughts. It's about stepping back and observing them. Think about it. That monkey finally finds peace, not by forcing stillness, but by simply like watching his own crazy dance.
So it's more about awareness than control.
Yeah.
But what about those days when the thoughts feel less like a monkey and more like a raging bull? How do I like observe that?
Well, that's where practice comes in. And luckily, this book gives us another great tool. Remember the river of thoughts?
Yeah.
Picture this. You're sitting by a stream, and you're watching the leaves float by. Each leaf is a thought. You see it, you acknowledge it, but you don't jump in and get swept away by the current.
Okay, yeah. I can see how that would be a helpful visualization on a good day. But isn't that a bit passive? What if I need to, like, deal with a thought? Not just watch it float by.
Well, that's where discernment comes in, and we'll explore that more as we go. But for now, just focus on that initial step, creating space between you and the thought. Just like the monkey learns to simply watch you, you can practice observing your thoughts without getting caught up in their drama.
Interesting. I'm already sensing this is going to be a challenging deep dive in a good way. But mindfulness is just one piece of the puzzle, right? What about when we're facing like the tough stuff in life? The struggles, the setbacks, those days when it's hard to find any Zen at all.
Right, and that's where a story like the lotus seed comes in. It's a beautiful image, this tiny seed buried in the mud, struggling to survive. But the mud, as gross as it seems, is actually the seed's source of nourishment. Without that struggle, there's no lotus flower.
Okay, I love that, like the saying, no mud, no lotus. But how does this relate to, say, my work stress, my relationship problems? Yeah. Are you saying I should just embrace the mud and wait for a flower to magically appear?
Not quite. Think of the mud as representing any challenge that you're facing. The story's about seeing those difficulties not as obstacles to happiness, but as the very conditions that you need for growth. Just as the lotus needs the mud, we need those experiences to push us to help us evolve. It's about finding the potential within the struggle.
So it's not about passively accepting difficult situations, but rather seeing them as, I don't know, opportunities.
Exactly. That's a much more empowered perspective, isn't it? I mean, the lotus doesn't just sit there in the mud and complain. It uses that very mud to fuel its journey upward.
Okay. I'm starting to see how these stories work on these different levels. There's like the surface message, and then there's this deeper layer of, well, I guess, wisdom.
Yeah.
And speaking of journeys, the story of the bamboo tree, that's a good one for anyone feeling impatient. 5 years of seemingly nothing, then boom, 90 feet tall practically overnight. Talk about delayed gratification.
What's fascinating here is this concept of unseen growth. Sometimes the most profound development happens beneath the surface. That bamboo's building a strong root system for 5 years. It's a reminder that just because we don't see immediate results doesn't mean nothing's happening. And when it's time, that growth can be sudden and dramatic.
Yeah, makes me think about all the times I've given up on something too soon. I'm like, it's not working. Maybe I just needed more time for those metaphorical roots to grow.
Yeah, exactly.
This brings up a big question for me, though. How do I know when to keep going and when to let go?
That's a great question, and it's one we'll definitely keep exploring as we dive deeper into these stories. What stands out to you so far? What story's resonating most strongly with you?
Tough to pick just one. But I am really intrigued by this whole idea of finding strength in unexpected places, like the lotus in the mud. And honestly, I think I need to work on my patience. I'm feeling inspired by that bamboo tree.
It's amazing how these simple stories can spark such deep reflections, right? And you're right, that theme of finding strength in unexpected places is so powerful. It makes me think of another story from the book, the stone and the water.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one. It's about how the stone doesn't fight the water right. It lets the water shape it over time.
Exactly. And at first glance, it might seem like the stone is being passive or even weak. But there's a deeper resilience at play here. It's not about brute force or resistance. It's about adaptability.
But isn't yielding sometimes seen as a weakness, though? How does the stone and the water challenge that notion?
That's such a great question, and it really gets to the heart of what this story is trying to teach us. You know, in Western culture, we often value strength as something that's forceful and assertive, but the stone in the water presents a very different kind of strength, one that comes from understanding and working with the forces around us, rather than always trying to control them.
Yeah, it's like that saying, be like water, my friend. Adapting to the container, finding a way through or around obstacles. But how do we apply that to real life? When I'm facing a challenge, my instinct is to fight back, not just yield.
Well, I think it starts with awareness. Recognize when you're in a stone and water situation. Is this a challenge that requires force? Or would I be better served by adapting, by being more flexible in my approach? Sometimes the most resilient thing we can do is to bend like a willow in the wind rather than trying to stand rigid like an oak.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this could apply to, say, dealing with a difficult coworker or even navigating a big life change. It's about choosing your battles wisely and knowing when to adapt rather than always resisting.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that sometimes the most powerful response isn't to push back, but to yield, to allow the situation to kind of shape you, to trust in the process of change.
It's a whole different way of thinking about strength, that's for sure. Speaking of strength, another story that really stuck with me is the spider's web. So delicate, yet it can withstand a storm because of all those intricate connections. It's kind of a paradox, isn't it?
It is. And that paradox speaks to the power of interconnectedness, which is such a central theme in Zen philosophy. We often think of strength as an individual quality, but the spider's web shows us that true strength can also come from our connections with others.
It's like that African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. But sometimes those connections can feel fragile, though, like they could snap under pressure. How do we build relationships that are strong enough to weather the storms?
Well, one key ingredient is communication. And in The Gift of Listening, we see the profound impact that simply listening can have. It's about truly hearing what the other person is saying without judgment or interruption, creating a space for them to feel seen and understood.
Yeah, I've been trying to be more mindful of this in my own life. It's so easy to get caught up in my own head, thinking about what I'm going to say next, that I forget to really listen. But when I do manage to quiet my mind and truly listen, it's amazing how much deeper the connection feels.
It's like we're opening ourselves up to a different level of understanding. Not just hearing the words, but feeling the emotions behind them. And sometimes that's all it takes to create a bridge of empathy and connection.
But how do we do that when there's so much noise in our lives? I mean, we're constantly bombarded with information, social media, the 24-hour news cycle. It's like our minds never get a break. How do we cultivate that stillness and quiet that's needed for true listening?
That's where the practice of mindfulness comes in again. Remember those earlier stories about the monkey mind and the river of thoughts? It's about learning to observe those thoughts and emotions without getting swept away by them, creating that space between ourselves and the constant chatter, even if it's just for a few moments.
So it's like we're training our minds to be more present, more aware, so that we can be fully there for others when they need us.
Exactly. And those moments of presence, of deep listening, can be so transformative, not just for our relationships, but for ourselves as well. They allow us to tap into a deeper level of understanding and compassion.
Which reminds me of another story that really resonated with me, The Whispering Wind.
Ah, yes. A beautiful reminder that wisdom can come from unexpected sources if we're open to listening. And it's not just about listening to others, it's about listening to ourselves, to the whispers of our own intuition.
That story always makes me think about how often I ignore my own inner voice. I get so caught up in what I should be doing, what other people expect of me, that I lose touch with what truly feels right for me.
And that inner voice, that intuition, can be such a powerful guide. It's connected to a deeper wisdom, a knowing that goes beyond logic and reason. But like the whispering wind, it can be subtle, easily drowned out by the noise of our busy lives.
So it's about creating that space for stillness, for reflection, for listening to those whispers within. And perhaps like the traveler in the story, being willing to venture off the beaten path, to trust our own inner compass.
Beautifully put. It's about having the courage to follow our own unique path, even if it looks different from what others expect of us.
And that can be a challenge, can't it? Especially in a world that often tells us there's only one right way to do things.
Absolutely. But these Zen stories remind us that there's beauty in diversity, in individuality, that each of us has our own unique gifts to offer the world. And it's in embracing those gifts, in expressing our authentic selves, that we find true fulfillment.
So it's not about trying to fit into someone else's mold, but rather about discovering and nurturing our own unique shape and form.
And maybe like the flower in the radiance of the sun, finding joy in simply blooming where we're planted.
Exactly. Accepting ourselves as we are with all our imperfections and quirks, and recognizing that our unique qualities are what make us special. It's about radiating our own light, sharing our own unique beauty with the world, just like those fireflies dancing in the night.
And isn't it amazing how those tiny creatures, just by being themselves, can light up an entire forest?
It's a reminder that even the smallest act of kindness, the smallest spark of light, can make a difference. And that we all have the power to illuminate the world in our own unique way.
And that brings us to another important theme that's woven throughout these stories: the power of kindness. It's not just about grand gestures, it's about those small, everyday acts of compassion that can ripple out and touch the lives of others in really profound ways.
Like the child in the ripple of kindness, whose simple act of sharing her lunch inspires others to do the same, creating a chain reaction of generosity.
Exactly. It's a reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness can have a ripple effect, creating a wave of positive change that extends far beyond our immediate circle.
And that those ripples can start with something as simple as a smile, a kind word, or a helping hand.
It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected, and that our actions, no matter how small, have the power to impact others.
And that even in the face of darkness and difficulty, there's always the potential for light and love to shine through.
And that's a beautiful message to carry with us as we continue to explore these stories, don't you think?
Absolutely. I'm feeling inspired to bring a little more of that Zen Monkey wisdom into my own life. As we kind of move into the final stretch of this deep dive, I'm struck by how these stories aren't just about finding peace and quiet. It's like they're giving us a whole toolbox for dealing with the messiness of life.
That's a great observation, and it speaks to the practicality of Zen philosophy. It's not about escaping from the world. It's about engaging with it in a skillful way, navigating the ups and downs with more awareness and resilience.
So it's less about sitting on a mountaintop meditating and more about, bringing that mountaintop stillness into the chaos of everyday life.
Exactly. And one story that really captures that is the silent river. After a storm turns it all up, the river eventually settles back into a state of calm. It's not that the river avoids the storm, but it knows how to return to that natural peace.
Okay, that is a reassuring thought, because sometimes life feels like one giant storm. But are you saying we should just passively wait for things to calm down?
It's not about passivity. It's about recognizing that some things are beyond our control. The river can't stop the storm, but it can trust in its own ability to return to stillness. It's about cultivating that inner strength, that unshakable core.
It makes me think about the saying, "This too shall pass." Even when things feel really intense, there's a sense that it's not permanent. But how do we tap into that unshakable core? It feels like some days I'm more of a wobbly leaf than a steady river.
Well, think about the story of the mountain's wisdom. That mountain stands tall through countless storms and sunrises, unchanging amidst all the chaos. It's an image of inner strength, and that strength comes from cultivating a deep sense of acceptance.
Acceptance of what exactly? Is it just about accepting things we can't change?
It's bigger than that. It's about accepting ourselves, our flaws, our limitations. It's about accepting others, even those who challenge us. It's about accepting the circumstances of our lives, the good and the bad, without resistance.
Wow, that's a lot to accept. Isn't that just giving up, though? If I accept everything, well, I just become complacent.
Acceptance isn't about resignation. It's actually a very active process. It's about acknowledging reality as it is without judgment or resistance. And from that place of acceptance, we can act with clarity and purpose.
So it's not about passively accepting everything, but more about seeing things clearly and then choosing how to respond.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that true freedom comes not from controlling everything, but from surrendering to what is. And that surrender isn't about weakness, it's about aligning ourselves with the natural flow of life.
Like water flowing around a rock instead of trying to smash through it. So are you saying we should just go with the flow all the time?
It's not about blindly following whatever comes our way. It's about recognizing that there are forces at play that are bigger than us. And sometimes the wisest course of action is to work with those forces to adapt and adjust, rather than trying to force things to go our way.
That makes sense. But how do we know when to adapt and when to stand our ground? There must be times when pushing back is the right thing to do, right?
Absolutely. There's a time for yielding and a time for asserting ourselves. The key is to discern the difference, to act with wisdom and compassion, not just react from habit or fear.
So it's like we're developing this inner compass that helps us navigate the complexities of life. But that compass is not just about logic and reason. It's also about intuition, about listening to those whispers of wisdom that come from within.
Exactly. And that's where those themes of mindfulness and acceptance come full circle. By quieting the mind, by letting go of judgment, we create space for that deeper wisdom to emerge.
It's like those stories we talked about earlier, the silent bell and the whispering wind. The wisdom is there all around us, but we need to be still and quiet enough to hear it.
And that wisdom, it's not always what we expect. Sometimes it challenges our beliefs, pushes us outside our comfort zone, but that's where real growth happens, isn't it?
It is. And speaking of growth, I'm reminded of the story of the tree's gift. The tree doesn't hoard its fruits. It gives them freely, knowing that in giving, it also receives. It's a beautiful reminder that true fulfillment comes not from accumulating possessions, but from sharing our gifts with the world.
And that giving, it takes many forms. It could be sharing our time, our talents, our resources. It could be offering a kind word, a listening ear, a helping hand. It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected and that even the smallest acts of generosity can make a difference.
Like that child in the heart of a child, offering a simple smile and a helping hand to a stranger. It's a reminder that love and compassion are universal languages, that they transcend cultural differences and language barriers.
And those acts of kindness, they don't just benefit the recipient, they also nourish the giver. It's like a boomerang. What we put out into the world comes back to us multiplied.
It creates a beautiful cycle of giving and receiving, doesn't it?
It does. And that cycle, it starts with each of us. It starts with choosing to act with kindness and compassion, with choosing to see the interconnectedness of all things, with choosing to cultivate inner peace and acceptance.
And those choices, they ripple out into the world, creating a wave of positive change.
It's like that beautiful image from The Dance of the Fireflies, each individual light contributing to the collective brilliance.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Zen Monkey and the Lotus Flower, I'm left feeling inspired, challenged, and maybe even a little bit wiser.
And hopefully with a renewed sense of wonder and curiosity about the world and our place within it.
Absolutely. It's like these stories have given us a new lens through which to view life, a lens that reveals the beauty, the wisdom, and the interconnectedness of it all.
And that's a gift that keeps on giving, isn't it?
It truly is. Thanks for joining me on this incredible journey. And remember, the real adventure begins when we take these insights and weave them into the fabric of our own lives.
Go out there and be the change you wish to see in the world. And don't forget to keep those Zen monkeys close at hand.
If you enjoyed this podcast, support our growth by subscribing for more episodes on the best books.